Welcome back. If I were to list my 3 favorite types of watches, the first would be a military type, either a field or say a pilot's watch. And that would be followed by a GMT watch, which would then be followed by a watch with an internal rotating bezel, like a compressor-style diver. And the watch we're looking at today is kind of a combination of all 3 of those, and it's the new Phoibos Eagle Ray GMT, and it's a watch that I've nicknamed the Flying Kraken. And I think it's safe to say that I like the idea of the watch from the first moment I saw it, which was actually a few months ago when somebody showed some renderings on the Phoibos Facebook group. And I was actually keeping my fingers crossed hoping they would contact me when these were ready, and sure enough they did. So I do need to give a huge thank you to both Ethan and Phoibos for giving me this to really put through its paces. Now, I usually use more of a top-down, really methodical approach when I review these watches. So I usually save the movement towards the end, but I do want to talk about it now right at the front. And that's because it's kind of the elephant in the room here. For some, this is going to be the worst part of the watch, but in some ways it's actually one of the better things about it. It just kind of depends on what your point of view of quartz is. Personally, I think that no matter what your collection is, you should always have one really good quartz watch. So this one uses a Swiss Ronda 515 quartz GMT movement. And you're not going to have that smooth sweep, and there is going to be a chance that the second hand won't be perfectly lined up. But there are a few benefits to this movement as well, namely a reduced price and a reduced thickness of the watch compared to other GMTs out there. The MSRP for the Eagle Ray GMT here is $200, and if you were looking for an automatic, I think the cheapest one that I know of is a Steinhardt for around $500. And the next up is maybe a Glycine Airman, and that you actually have to find on sale. The only exception to that might be some watches on AliExpress, but those are going to use an off-brand Chinese movement, as well as a few of the Vostok GMTs I've shown, but those are what I refer to as an original GMT, and you can't adjust the hour or the GMT hand separately. So if you're looking for a pretty affordable GMT, this is a pretty good option, and it's actually a pretty solid option at that. So you're talking about a 3/16 stainless case that's 41 millimeters wide, without the crowns. And as the crowns aren't very big, you're talking about a total width of 42 1/4. Now combine that with a lug-to-lug of 47 millimeters, and you're really talking about a platform that should fit most people. However, where the Eagle Ray GMT really shines is that it has a total thickness just over 12, and that's with a double-domed sapphire crystal with AR. Not to mention 300 meters of water resistance. And love it or hate it, the quartz movement has a lot to do with that. And weight-wise, you're looking at about 75 grams with the strap. So it's got a good feel to it, but it's really a watch that you can just forget you're wearing. The case itself has this bead-blasted type finish, which is rather unusual for a diver. In fact, it kind of reminds me more of a few field watches I've seen. The overall shape of the case is very similar to the other Eagle Rays, yet I think it's missing some of the finer touches. And those lugs, they're a bit more squared off than the more curved ones on the bronze Eagle Ray. All in all, the case does feel very well made, but it does have a bit more of a utilitarian look to it. The case back is something that I both love and hate. I just love the design of it, especially on a GMT watch, where it lists the major cities and the time zones they're attached to. And it's possibly one of the most useful GMT casebacks I've seen. Yet it's done in this mirror-like high-polish finish, and it's one of those finishes that's almost guaranteed to get scratched up over time. In fact, I've already got a few scratches on this one after a week. Personally, I would have loved this design, but done in a fashion that's either stamped or embossed like their other casebacks. Now, there are 2 crowns at the right, and they are a bit small, but the knurling makes it easy to use, although it might be a little trickier while you're wearing it just because of the size. Both crowns are signed with the Phoibos logo, but I would have preferred it if the bezel crown had a little bit of a different design, just to make it easier to know which one it actually is. Now, one nice thing is that not only is the main crown a screw down, but also the one that operates the bezel. And that's something that sets it apart here, especially in the price range compared to other compressor-style watches. So that's a real positive, as well as the bezel action. It's bidirectional as you'd expect, but it just has this very nice smooth action. The bead-blasted finish of the case isn't the only thing that I think gives this a little bit of a military feel. The other is the very thin coin-edged fixed bezel, which to me just kind of says pilot's watch. And I think when you combine that with the train track chapter ring on the dial, it just starts to have a bit of an Oris Big Crown vibe to it, but kind of mixed with a compressor-style diver. The bezel has a high polish to it, such that when the light hits it, it just really highlights it off and helps it stand apart from the duller bead blasting of the case. It's kind of an interesting combination, but I do think that a normal brush finish would have looked better on the case. But this does really bring focus and just highlights the dial. There are 5 different colorways, 3 of which have a bit more color. Then you have a normal black and white, as well as this one, which has gold hands and indices that are filled with this off-yellow old radium lume. The main area of the dial just really reminds me of the Bronze Eagle Ray, and I think it's just as well done and just as beautiful to look at. It's really striking, especially when you look at it in macro. Although I do wish that they had kept the date at the 6, like the other Eagle Rays. It does have a nice framing to it, so that does help it blend in just a little bit with the applied indices. And those indices do have a decent amount of height to them. So much so that when you look at the chapter ring just beyond, it seems almost sunken, even though it's not. And I think when you combine that with the sloped bezel and the 4 layers of hands, well, it just gives the Eagle Ray a great sense of depth. The hands just look beautiful, and there's enough contrast to easily make them out against the dark black depths of the dial. And I really do love the red highlight on the GMT hand. Not only does it set it apart and make it easy to identify, but it also matches a 24-hour marker on the bezel. In person, the hands look perfect, but on macro shots I can see a few minor imperfections. But I still think they're pretty good for a $200 watch. At the top of the dial, we do have the Phoibos logo. And love it or hate it, it's there, just kind of go with your gut instincts on that. But the gold tones do dull it down compared to say some other Phoiboses. And I do want to point out that I really love the minimal amount of text at the bottom of the dial. Overall, I just really like the design here, and I think it makes a great functional GMT. The only part I really don't like are the Roman numerals in the chapter ring, as I think they just kind of get lost in it, and it probably would have been better off without them. And one thing I really do want to point out is that this watch has a big presence to it, especially for a compressor. And I think part of that is because there really isn't much of a bezel, and that crystal and dial just seem to go case to case. But I think a lot of it also has to do with the design. Right now, this is the 5th compressor-style watch I've had. And one thing I've noticed with those is that because of the design, the bezel just takes up a good amount of real estate, such that the dial and the hands just always seem smaller than they should be for a watch of that size. And part of that is because of the design. There just always seems to be some sort of contrast between the bezel and the dial. While here, that dark black depth just seems to go from the dial to the highly angled bezel seamlessly, which I think just gives it more of a cohesive appearance. And the end result is more of the opposite effect, where I think it gives it the presence of a 42 or maybe even a 43mm diver, but in a 41mm package. And that larger presence I think also extends to the Lume shot, where just every aspect is highlighted with 12 layers of old radium superluminova. I really love the way the Lume looks here. And for comparison, I did throw this up against 2 other Phoiboses, or maybe it's Phoebi. But either way, they're there with a turtle. And for the most part, the GMT does hold its own, and the hands seem to fade out just slightly before the turtle. So overall, I'd say it's good Lume, but maybe not as good as the other Phoebi. But keeping up with the Seiko at this price is still pretty good. Yet I do want to make a couple of points. The first is that the specific version uses old radium Lume, and the other 4 use BGW9. And that should perform just a little better, so this should be the weakest out of all of them. And the second is that compared to the other compressor-style watches, this is hands down the best Lume out of all of them. In fact, most of those other watches are actually kind of disappointing when it comes to Lume. Now, we've already talked a bit about the movement, but I do want to show you one thing that kind of annoys me. Now, you can adjust the GMT hand independently, so with that bezel you can keep track of 3 time zones. But rather than having advanced and discrete 1-hour increments, it just kind of freely rotates. So when you're adjusting it, you might wind up being just a little bit off than where it's supposed to be. Just kind of depends on how accurate you are when you're setting it. And this does bother my OCD a little bit. But there is one advantage to this, and that's because there are a handful of time zones in the world that are at half-hour increments rather than an hour, so this would be advantageous if you're going there. All the Eagle Ray GMTs come with a black tropic rubber strap, and I think this might actually be the same one that came on the bronze Eagle Ray, just with a matching brush buckle for the GMT version. And overall it's a good strap, but it is a bit stiff to start out with. And I think it can be a bit of a tight fit when you're feeding it into the buckle. But the watch does look good and wears well on it. Yet when it came down to it, I just thought it was kind of forgettable, and I never really warmed up to it. So in the long run, I did swap it out to a variety of different straps, and it looked pretty good on almost all of them. So that's actually what I'd recommend, not just so that the watch would look better, but so that it'd be just a little bit more comfortable. Now, I should mention that Phoibos has started issuing 10% discount codes, including one for this channel. But the trick with those is that they are part of a new affiliate program, so I would earn a small commission if you bought something with it. But regardless of that, if you are interested in this, I'd advise you to watch another review or two just to get a different opinion on it. But with that discount, it does drop the price down to $180, which is actually right in line with the only other quartz GMT watch that comes to mind, and that's a Citizen Nighthawk. And that is another great budget GMT option. Overall, I think Phoibos did a great job building and designing the Eagle Ray GMT, and especially this version. Not only is it a great looking capable diver, but I think it's one of the better looking compressor style watches I've seen. Now, would I prefer it if it was an automatic? Sure, and I actually hope they make one in the future. But if they did that, it would be 3 times as expensive and probably wouldn't be as thin. And that thinness, along with a GMT hand, make this a great travel watch, especially for those journeys where you really don't know what to expect, and those journeys where you might not want to take a watch that's as easy to repair or replace. But let me know what you think about the Eagle Ray GMT down below, or what do you think about the Citizen Nighthawk? I know there are a ton of reviews about it already, but it's always one I've been curious about. And as always, if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks for watching.